Hello there, I'm Lady Loy. You can catch me on Fridays 7 till 9 and Saturdays on Gold Standard Radio 7 till 9. And I've entitled this message or whatever I want to call it, When Harm Becomes Normalised. This morning I woke up feeling emotional. I had one of those dreams that I don't remember in detail, but the last part of it was impactful enough to feel troubling. And I don't normally remember my dreams, but over the last couple of weeks I have. So, as usual, I'm not going to spend 7 minutes detailing the whole of the dream, but in the dream I witnessed somebody having their eyes dug out with a spoon and his mouth cracked open to remove his teeth. And I don't think you need to know the whole of the visuals before breakfast, but for me, that symbolism had something to do with vision being obstructive and speech being denied. The dream left me wondering how my dream could be applied to everyday life, and I came to the conclusion that it had something to do with what happens when we become so accustomed to something that we stop questioning it. In my dream, I found myself somewhere that felt extremely dangerous. There was violence and suffering happening around me, and everybody seemed to have accepted it as a part of the environment. I hadn't. As you know, I don't like violent movies, so I was distressed. I was crying and I was trying to get away from what I was seeing. Then the person next to me, who looked like my daughter 1 minute and then somebody else the next, basically suggested that there was something wrong with me. "Why are you upset?" she said. "That's just the way life is. We see this all the time." I asked her, why does that mean that something is wrong with me? Because I don't like it. And then I woke up. I thought it was interesting because if we parallel my dream to real life, we tend to poo-poo all the time. Sometimes something happens repeatedly and eventually we stop asking whether it's right and start saying, well, that's just the way things are. Somebody is consistently disrespectful and we call it their responsibility. Somebody behaves badly in a relationship and we say that's just the way they are. Someone is treated unfairly at work and we're told that's just the workplace. A family dynamic has been unhealthy for years and somebody says that's just our family. And gradually, without even noticing, we can start adjusting ourselves to accommodate things that perhaps should be challenged instead. I'm not suggesting that every time something upsets us, we should assume the world is wrong and we are right. Sometimes we're the ones who need to grow. Sometimes we're overreacting. Sometimes we need to develop a thicker skin. And there is a difference between developing resilience and becoming desensitized. Resilience says, I can see this for what it is without allowing it to destroy me. Desensitization says, I've seen it so often that I don't really feel anything anymore. And I think that distinction matters because we can become very good at surviving things. We can become so good at adapting that we forget to ask whether the thing we've adapted to is actually good for us. I think many of us have done that at some point. We've stayed somewhere too long because we've learned how to cope with it. We've accepted behaviour because we found a way of managing around it. We've stopped complaining because complaining didn't change anything. And eventually somebody might even look at us and say, well, you seem fine. Yes, I might be functioning, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm fine with it. And there was another little part of my dream that I remember. I needed to use the toilet, but I was being told to hurry up. I was trying to do a number 2, but I was being hurried along, so I couldn't actually relax enough to finish. But, ironically, how often do we live like that? We are carrying things that need to be released. We are constantly being told to hurry up, get on with it, don't dwell on it, don't make a fuss, don't be so emotional, move on, keep going. And sometimes we haven't actually given ourselves enough time and space to process what we're carrying because we're being told what comes next. Life can be very good at putting us on a conveyor belt. There's always another responsibility, another deadline, another person who needs something, another problem to solve. And before we know it, you're functioning beautifully on the outside while internally you're thinking, could everybody just give me 5 minutes? I think that's why the dream affected me. It wasn't really about violence, it was about what we have become immune to. What happens to us when we're surrounded by things that feel wrong, but simply get used to them? Either because we don't want to rock the boat, or we're afraid, or we don't want to interfere or intervene. My dream was about being somewhere I didn't want to be, wanting to get away and feeling unable to. And perhaps that's a feeling many of us recognize. Maybe you've become so accustomed to chaos that peace feels strange. I think we need to be more careful about that phrase, that's just life. Because sometimes it is. Life is difficult. People disappoint us. Things happen that we cannot control. We can create a bubble around us where nothing painful ever happens. But there's a difference between normalizing violence, accepting reality, and surrendering our standards. The lesson I took from the dream was not to allow repetition to become justification. Just because you've seen something 100 times doesn't mean it's normal or healthy. Just because everyone around you has accepted something doesn't mean you have to. And just because you're capable of coping with something doesn't mean you are required to keep coping with it or living with it or condemn those who cannot cope. I think sometimes we confuse our ability to tolerate something with evidence that we should tolerate it. You can tolerate an awful lot and still know that you don't want to. I also think we need to give ourselves permission to remain affected by certain things. Not everything has to become normal simply because it's common. If something is cruel, you can still recognize it as cruel. If something is disrespectful, you can still recognize it as disrespectful. If something is making you unhappy, you don't have to persuade yourself that you're lucky because somebody else has it worse. And if your heart is telling you, I don't want to become accustomed to this, that's okay too. Because I would rather be a person who occasionally needs to step back because I care too much than someone who has become so accustomed to suffering that I no longer notice it. I can recognize somebody's pain without making it my own. I can walk away from an unhealthy environment without hating the people who remain there. So oddly enough, I think my dream gave me a question rather than an answer. What have I become so accustomed to that I no longer question it? What have I started calling just the way life is because I've been looking at it for so long? And where in my life am I being hurried along when perhaps I actually need to stop, breathe, and allow myself to deal with something properly before moving on? Every now and then it might be worth checking in with ourselves and asking, am I genuinely at peace with this? Or have I simply become very good at coping with it? Because there is a difference, and perhaps that's the little reminder I'd like to take from my strange and rather horrible dream. Don't be ashamed of the part of you that still notices when something isn't right. Protect it, listen to it, learn how to manage it, but don't automatically silence it simply because everybody else has stopped listening. Sometimes that uncomfortable little voice inside us isn't a problem that needs fixing. Sometimes it's the part of us that still knows what matters and what we should be paying attention to. So yeah, when I woke up from that dream, I did feel really uncomfortable. I knew it had something to do with normalizing violence and people just getting used to it. I mean, if you, back in my day, I keep saying that, but back in my day, somebody shouting at somebody was enough to discipline them or enough to get something in order. But today, people watch people being stabbed and tortured and they don't flinch. I've watched people watch not horror movies, but violent action movies, and they don't even squint. They sit there as though it's normal, and it's scary. Anyway, I'm not there. I don't want to be there. And so I'm sharing my dream with you, just to remind you to keep your humanity and take care of yourself, take care of each other until the next.